The sun crept up slow over the red mesas, spilling its first light across the dusty plains of New Mexico Territory, 1887. The wind hummed low over the dry grass, whispering through mesquite and fence wire, carrying the faint scent of coffee and wood smoke from the Dawson Ranch kitchen. It was a still morning, the kind that made even the land seem to be holding its breath, before the heat, before the work, before the noise of life began again. Inside the ranch house, the kitchen glowed with the orange light of a small fire. Martha moved quietly between stove and counter, her worn hand steady, her apron marked with flour and the long memory of years. She was humming an old tune, one from before the war, from before the world turned so mean, a song no one had words for anymore. Her voice blended with the hiss of bacon and the bubbling of black coffee, giving the air a warmth that only she could conjure. The door creaked behind her, and a shadow filled the frame, broad, tall, still as an oak. Jonas Creed ducked his head to step through, brushing the dust from his coat. They called him the giant rancher from Santa Fe to Silver City, though the name carried more reverence than mockery. He stood a full head taller than most men, his frame built from hard labor and old wars. His eyes were calm, almost gentle, but there was a weight in them, the kind that came from seeing too much and saying too little. The scar running from his ear to the edge of his jaw caught the morning light. It was an old wound from his Union cavalry days, one that never quite faded. Some said he'd taken a saber meant for another man. Jonas never confirmed it. He just went on mending fences and branding cattle like a man paying off an unseen debt. He tipped his hat to Martha. "Smells good," he said. His voice was gravel low, quiet, the kind that didn't waste breath. Martha smiled without looking up. "It'll taste better if you sit before it burns." Jonas took a seat at the small wooden table and poured himself coffee. The cup looked small in his hand. He sipped slow, eyes drifting toward the window, the horizon already starting to shimmer with heat. "Fence on the south line's down again," he said. "I told you that wind last night would take it." Martha replied, flipping eggs onto a plate. "You can't fight the desert. You just mend what it breaks." Jonas gave a short nod. "Reckon that's true." They ate together in the easy silence of people who'd long since learned each other's rhythms. The ranch was small, just a few dozen head of cattle, a pair of horses, and a lifetime of work, but it was enough. For Jonas, it was peace. For Martha, it was home. When the dishes were done and the light had turned harsh and white, Jonas saddled Crow, his black stallion, mean-eyed but loyal, and rode south to mend the fence. Martha watched him go from the porch, shading her face. The wind tugged at her gray hair. She smiled faintly, whispering a small prayer as his silhouette disappeared into the horizon. By late morning, the sun stood high and cruel. Martha went about her chores, scrubbing, sweeping, tending to the stove, until the first faint tremor of hooves reached her ears. She froze, straightening. The sound grew louder, faster, too wild for cattle, too careless for travelers. Through the window, she saw them, 5 riders cresting the ridge, dust swirling around them like smoke. Black dusters, rough faces, the kind of men the law forgot or feared. The leader rode a bay horse and sat with a slouch that spoke of arrogance and whiskey. On each man's sleeve glinted a faded patch, a vulture with wings outspread, its beak dripping red. Her stomach turned cold. They rode straight into the yard, kicking up dust. The bay horse stopped near the porch. Its rider, a lean, sharp-faced man with a cruel smile, spat tobacco and called out, "Afternoon, ma'am. We were wondering if the giant's cook had a heart big enough to feed weary travelers." Martha didn't move. "We've got nothing for you here," she said firmly. The man laughed and swung down from his horse. "Oh, I think you do. Don't be shy now." Another dismounted, his eyes already sweeping the porch, the door, the windows. He smelled trouble like a wolf smells blood. They pushed through the kitchen door without waiting for an answer. The smell of stew and bread hit them, and one of the younger men grinned wide. "Hell, boys, she's been cooking just for us." He grabbed a spoon from the counter and dipped it into the pot. "Fine stew, lady," he said with his mouth full. "You'll make a man fall in love." "Put that down," Martha said, her voice shaking but strong. He stepped closer. Now why would I do that, sweetheart? Clay Maddox, the leader, leaned against the doorframe, watching. His grin didn't reach his eyes. Don't rile her up, Jeb. We're guests here. Guests? Martha snapped. You're thieves. Maddox's grin thinned. Depends who's telling the story. The young one reached for her arm, and she slapped his hand away. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. The room went still. Then he struck her across the face, hard. She stumbled back, hitting the stove. The stew pot rattled and spilled, the rich smell of meat turning acrid as it hit the fire. Maddox sighed, almost bored. Didn't I say mind your manners? He murmured. The others laughed. They tore through the shelves, grabbing bread, jerky, a tin of coffee. One found a bottle of whiskey and held it up like a prize. Take it all, Maddox said. We're paying our respects. When they were done, they left the kitchen in ruins. One man, grinning, kicked over the pot on his way out. It crashed to the floor, splattering black stew across the boards. Thanks for lunch, Granny, he said. They mounted up and rode off, their laughter fading into the wind. Dust settled in the yard. Martha sank to her knees, clutching the edge of the counter, the taste of blood on her tongue. The hours dragged slow after that. The sun began to tilt west when she finally managed to stand. Her reflection in the window was strange, one side of her face red and swelling, her eyes hollow. She took a wet rag to clean the mess, but her hands trembled too much. The distant sound of hooves reached her again. For a moment, her heart stopped, but this time, the rhythm was slower, measured, familiar. Jonas rode into the yard, Crow's shadow stretching long across the dust. He swung down from the saddle, his boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. His gaze swept the wrecked yard, the broken barrels, the shattered pot near the door. He stepped inside. The smell of smoke and spilled whiskey filled the air. Martha sat near the hearth, her apron torn, her cheek bruised purple. Jonas knelt beside her. Martha. His voice was soft, too soft for what he felt. She blinked up at him, her lips trembling. They came around noon, 5 of them. Mean ones. He looked around the mess, the footprints, the patch of blood on the floorboards, and something old flickered in his eyes. Who? He asked quietly. They wore black dusters, she said, her voice breaking, with a vulture patch on the arm. Jonas froze. The room seemed to hold its breath. He stood, towering above her, the light from the dying fire throwing shadows up the walls. Slowly, he reached for his hat and lowered it over his eyes. I had buried that gang 5 years ago, he said, almost to himself. Martha looked up at him, confused. You mean? Clay Maddox, he said, his tone flat, his jaw tight. I spared him once. Thought the desert would finish what I didn't. The gun belt hadn't felt that heavy in years. Jonas lifted it from the old chest, the leather stiff with age, the metal dull except where his thumb brushed away the dust. The Colt Peacemaker lay nestled within, its barrel long and cold, its surface faintly shining in the lantern light. He checked the cylinder out of habit, turning it with a slow click, then holstered it and cinched the belt around his waist. The sound of the buckle echoed, softly through the barn. Crow stamped once, his black coat rippling under the dim light. Jonas placed a hand on the horse's neck. We ride till sundown, he murmured. The animal snorted, as if understanding. Jonas pulled his coat tight, took one last look at the ranch house behind him, its windows still glowing faintly with Martha's lamplight, and swung into the saddle. The wind cut sharp and cold across the plain as he turned west. The trail wound through broken land and dying scrub, every mile dragging ghosts from the corners of his memory. Old towns stood hollow, their signs half-rotted, their windows staring out like dead eyes. He passed a church whose steeple leaned into the wind, and a cemetery where the crosses had long since toppled. The sky burned orange as the sun sank, painting the land in the color of blood. They said the giant rode that day with death itself beside him. The words, whispered once by an old ranch hand around a fire, seemed to rise from the dust and follow him now. He rode hard through the dry creek beds, Crow's hooves cracking the crusted earth. Coyotes called from the ridges, their cries thin and hungry. Ahead, the road split toward a strip of light, the faint glow of lanterns from a frontier saloon crouched beside a desolate trading post. Jonas reined in, the boards of the porch creaking under Crow's weight as he stopped. Inside, the air stank of sweat and smoke. A half-dozen drifters sat hunched over cards, and a piano tinkled weakly in the corner. When Jonas entered, the room quieted. Men turned to look, not with challenge, but with unease, as if they'd just seen a ghost. He walked to the bar. The bartender, a thin man with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, swallowed hard. "Evening, mister. What'll it be?" "Information." Jonas set a coin on the counter. 5 riders. Black dusters. Vulture patch. The bartender's eyes flicked toward the window, then back. "Ain't seen him myself, but folks been talking. Word is they're holed up near Hell's Canyon. Stage line runs through there tomorrow. They plan to hit it, take the gold shipment from Silver City." Jonas nodded once. "How far?" "Half a day, maybe less. But you don't want to go that way, friend. Folks who ride into that canyon don't ride out." Jonas picked up his coin, placed it back on the bar. "I've already been buried once," he said, and turned to leave. Outside, he stopped by the stables. The smell of hay and horse sweat filled the air. A boy, no older than 12, stepped out from behind a stall, wiping his hands on his shirt. His skin was dark, his eyes wide with fear and curiosity. "Senor," the boy whispered, "you looking for the men with the black coats?" Jonas paused. "You seen them?" The boy nodded. "See, they come through last night. Drunk. One of their horses still here. He kicked the shoe loose. Said they'd be back when the storm breaks." Jonas followed the boy to a stall where a pale stallion stood restless, its left hoof cracked and bleeding. He crouched, studied the iron shoe hanging loose. The leather saddle bore the faint mark of the vulture insignia. He rose slowly, his face unreadable. "You a brave one," Jonas said softly. "You keep your head down when they come back." The boy frowned. "You going after them?" Jonas reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver dollar, pressing it into the boy's small hand. "Stay inside tonight. Don't look out, no matter what you hear." The boy's lips moved like a prayer, but Jonas was already gone, leading Crow back into the wind. The plain stretched endless under a bruised sky. A storm was brewing, the kind that rolled down from the mountains with a fury that could strip flesh from bone. Jonas could smell it before it came, that raw scent of rain and iron. He pulled his hat lower, his mind turning back to a time long before the ranch, before peace had become a lie, he told himself. He remembered the desert, the smoke, the echo of rifles in a canyon somewhere south of El Paso. He'd been a cavalry scout then, tracking a band of deserters turned raiders. Clay Maddox was among them, a young corporal with a grin that never reached his eyes. When the ambush came, Jonas had him in his sights, but he hesitated. The man was down, wounded, reaching for his pistol. Jonas had seen too much death then, too many boys barely men. So he lowered his gun. He'd told himself it was mercy. Now, riding through the darkness, he muttered the word again, bitter as bile. "Mercy. My one mistake." The storm broke. Lightning ripped across the sky, turning the desert white for a heartbeat. Thunder rolled over the land like cannon fire. The rain came in sheets, cold and violent, drumming against his hat, his coat, his face. Crow fought against the wind, but Jonas held firm, eyes fixed on the horizon where the land rose into jagged cliffs. Hell's Canyon lay ahead, a deep, narrow wound carved into the world, the kind of place men whispered about but never visited. The road twisted down between walls of red rock, slick with rain. He rode slow, each step careful, the sound of hooves lost in the roar of the storm. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote yelped, short, cut off too suddenly. Jonas drew his rifle from a saddle scabbard and checked the chamber. The sound of rain softened, replaced by the steady hiss of wind threading through the rocks. The canyon opened wider, revealing a shallow basin where the remnants of an old campfire smoldered under a ledge. Jonas dismounted, crouched near it. The ashes were warm. He touched the ground and felt the faint print of boot heels, fresh in the mud. He looked toward the north wall, faint tracks of horses leading upward, toward higher ground. He stood, staring into the dark. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the canyon rim, and there they were, 5 silhouettes on the ridge, motionless against the flashing heavens. The rain streamed off their hats and coats, their outlines sharp as carved stone. Jonas's breath came slow. His hand found the Colt at his side. For a moment, the world seemed to hold still. Only the wind, the rain, the hiss of fate closing in. Then the thunder followed, shaking the earth beneath him. Crow whinnied and turned, restless. Jonas lifted his gaze back to the ridge, but the shapes were gone. Only the storm remained, rolling, alive, and waiting. He swung into the saddle again, the rain turning to sheets of silver in the lightning flashes. His hat brim dripped, his coat heavy with water, his eyes cold and clear. Ahead lay the canyon's mouth, and somewhere beyond it, 5 men who had forgotten what it meant to be afraid. The wind screamed down from the cliffs, tearing at him as if to warn him back. But Jonas Creed did not turn around. He pressed his heels to Crow's flank, and together they rode on, into the storm, into the dark, into legend. The fire cracked and hissed under the weight of the rain, its glow casting long, twitching shadows against the canyon walls. Clay Maddox sat with his back to the blaze, his hat tilted low, a cigar clamped between his teeth. His men sprawled around him, drunk, restless, laughing too loud for men who'd killed and stolen before noon. The air reeked of whiskey, wet leather, and arrogance. Maddox took a long drag from his cigar, exhaled smoke toward the storm, and said, "That giant fool won't come this far. He's got a ranch, a cook, a quiet life. Men like him die slow, not brave." A murmur of laughter followed, but it faded fast, lost under a distant roll of thunder. The night pressed close, heavy and dark, the storm's edge creeping nearer with every heartbeat. Maddox flicked ash into the mud. "Heard tell he used to be cavalry," he said. "Scout for the Union. But the years dull every blade, boys. Even the big ones." Out in the black beyond the firelight, the canyon breathed. Shadows shifted with the wind, slick rock glistened with rain, and somewhere between the gusts, a faint click echoed, soft, metallic, deliberate. One of the guards at the perimeter struck a match, shielding it with his palm as he lit a cigar. The brief flame flared, painting his face in orange. He inhaled, eyes half-lidded, exhaled a curl of smoke, and in that moment, the glow caught something across from him. 2 pale eyes reflecting light. The shot came before thought. A single crack of thunder that wasn't thunder at all. The guard dropped, his cigar tumbling end over end into the mud, still burning as it fell. The others froze. Maddox turned sharply, his hand flying to his gun. "Who's out there?" His voice carried through the storm, too loud, too desperate. Silence answered. Then another shot. A man by the wagon jerked backward, clutching his throat, blood spraying the fire's edge. Panic burst loose. The gang scattered, shouting, tripping over one another, firing wildly into the rain. Bullets sparked off stone, cutting through smoke and darkness. Jonas Creed moved with the storm. He was a ghost among the rocks, his long coat blending with the shadows, his breath slow and steady. He reloaded without looking, his fingers finding the rhythm they'd known since war. Lightning flashed, and for an instant he stood revealed on the ridge above them, soaked to the bone, eyes cold as the steel he carried. He descended without sound, each step measured, patient. The storm hid his approach, its roar masking the soft scrape of boots against stone. He fired once, the muzzle flash lighting the canyon like a flare. Another man fell screaming, his body half submerged in the mud. Jonas pressed onward, the rifle low, his movements calm, no fury, no haste, only the quiet certainty of a man reclaiming something long denied. The scent of wet earth filled his lungs. The hiss of rain on hot metal sang in his ears. Between the chaos, memories came unbidden. Martha's hand stirring a pot of stew, her humming low and sweet in the morning light. The way she'd smiled when she told him to eat more, her voice gentle but firm. He remembered her laughter, the way it filled the kitchen and drowned out the ticking of his pocket watch. He'd buried that sound once, beneath work and silence. Tonight it returned, clearer than gunfire. A shape lunged from behind a boulder. Jonas swung the rifle like a club, the butt striking bone with a crack. The man went down hard. Jonas turned and fired before the body hit the ground. The flash revealed Maddox ducking behind a wagon, his face twisted in rage. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying away the smoke. 3 men left. Maybe 2. Jonas crouched, listening. The rain had eased, falling now in slow, heavy drops that pattered like a heartbeat. He could hear Maddox shouting orders, broken, slurred, his authority bleeding out with every word. Fan out. Find him. He ain't a ghost. Jonas moved left, slipping through a cleft in the rock. One of the outlaws appeared ahead, rifle trembling, eyes darting into the dark. Jonas fired once. The man fell sideways, his weapon clattering against stone. Lightning split the sky again. For a brief, blinding instant, Maddox's face appeared in full, pale, wet, furious. He was running for higher ground, clutching his revolver, limping from a wound that wasn't fresh. Jonas followed. The climb was steep, the mud slick. Thunder rolled through the canyon like cannon fire. Each flash of lightning revealed fragments of the dead. A hand here, a boot there, faces half buried in water. By the time Jonas reached the ridge, only Maddox remained, standing at the edge with the storm behind him. The outlaw turned, blood streaking down his sleeve. "You took everything from me once," he shouted, voice raw. "Now you come to finish it." Jonas stopped a few yards away. "I should have finished it then." Maddox spat, red mixing with rain. "You think you're justice?" Jonas shook his head slowly. "Justice died years ago." His hand hovered above his Colt. "I'm what comes after." The storm cracked overhead, the sky bleeding crimson with the last light of day. Maddox raised his gun. His hand trembled, but his grin held. "Then let's end this, preacher." He drew first. The flash of his revolver cut through the rain, wild, desperate. The bullet screamed past Jonas's ear. Jonas's hand moved like muscle memory. One shot. The echo bounced through the canyon, rolling into the thunder until it was impossible to tell which came first. Maddox staggered backward, his eyes wide, the strength draining from his legs. He dropped his gun, looked down at the dark bloom spreading across his chest. Jonas holstered his weapon and stepped forward. Maddox sank to his knees, breathing shallow. The rain ran red down his coat. "You should have killed me back then," Maddox rasped. "Would have saved you the trouble." "I thought mercy was worth something," Jonas said quietly. "Turns out I was wrong." Maddox coughed, blood flecking his chin. "You think this changes a damn thing? There'll always be more like me." Jonas looked past him, toward the horizon where the storm was breaking. "Then I'll keep burying them." Maddox tried to laugh, but it came out a wheeze. His head bowed, his breath rattled once, and then he went still. Jonas stood over him a long moment, the wind whipping at his coat, his face unreadable. The rain softened to a mist. The world felt hollow, empty of sound, of rage, of everything but the ache in his chest. He turned toward the canyon below. Smoke from the dying fire drifted upward, curling into the air like ghosts returning to the sky. The bodies of Maddox's men lay scattered among the rocks, already fading into the mud. Jonas holstered his Colt, the weight of it no heavier than before, though his heart felt older by years. He walked back down the ridge, each step slow, deliberate. The thunder was gone now, replaced by the whisper of wind across wet stone. At the canyon floor, Crow waited, patient, silent. Jonas ran a hand along the horse's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the slick coat. He looked once more toward the ridge, where the last streak of sunset burned faintly through the clouds. The light caught the wet ground, turning it to blood and gold. He climbed into the saddle. The wind shifted east, carrying away the smell of smoke and gunpowder. As he rode from the canyon, the storm faded behind him, leaving the land washed clean and still. Somewhere far ahead lay the ranch, a kitchen light flickering against the night. The canyon lay silent after the storm. Smoke drifted from the dying fire, curling into the gray morning sky like ghosts rising to heaven. Crows circled above, their cries echoing off the wet stone walls, sharp and hollow. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the air still smelled of gunpowder and iron, the earth dark with blood and water. Jonas Creed stood among the bodies, his coat torn, his face streaked with mud and rain. A thin line of blood ran down his arm, soaking into the cuff of his sleeve, but he barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, the place where night had finally surrendered to dawn. He holstered his Colt and looked around the camp. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing faintly against the mud. The gang's horses stood tethered near the rocks, restless and slick with rain. Jonas moved among them, slow and deliberate, checking saddlebags one by one. He found what he'd come for in the third, a small tin locket, scuffed and bent, still holding the faint imprint of Martha's name etched by hand. He turned it in his fingers, thumb brushing the edge, and for the first time that night, his shoulders eased. In another saddlebag, he found her kitchen knife, the handle worn smooth from years of use, a bag of stolen coffee beans, a wool shawl still carrying the faint scent of her lavender soap. He gathered them carefully, wrapping them in a strip of oilcloth from one of the gang's packs. The crows landed nearby, hopping between the bodies. Jonas watched them for a moment, then moved to the wagon where the outlaws had stashed their weapons. Rifles, pistols, boxes of ammunition, tools that had taken too much from too many. He dragged them one by one to a patch of dry ground near the canyon wall. The rocks there were loose and sharp. With his bare hands, he stacked them, stone upon stone, building a low cairn until the guns were buried beneath it. When it was done, he stood over the pile and took off his hat. "No more killing," he said quietly, the words barely more than breath. The wind stirred around him, carrying dust and ash through the air, as if the canyon itself was exhaling. He turned toward Crow, who waited at the edge of the camp, head bowed, flanks streaked with rain. The horse nickered softly as Jonas approached. "Easy, boy," he murmured, patting his neck. "We're going home." The ride back was long and wordless. The storm had left the land washed clean, the mesas shining wet in the morning light. Pools of water gathered in the ruts of the trail, reflecting the red dawn like pieces of broken sky. Jonas rode slow, every movement weighted with fatigue. The ache in his shoulder throbbed with each breath, but he didn't stop. As the miles passed, the canyon fell away behind him, its echoes fading into memory. He thought of the years he'd spent avoiding the man he used to be, the soldier, the hunter, the one who lived by the gun. He tried to bury that life under fences and cattle, under quiet mornings and coffee shared with an old woman who refused to leave his side. But the truth was simple and cruel. Some men weren't built for peace. They were forged for moments like this, when the world turned dark and needed someone to set it right, no matter the cost. The sun climbed higher, warming the plains. By the time the ranch came into view, the sky had cleared to a pale blue, the kind that came only after a storm. The Dawson Ranch sat quiet against the land, smoke rising from the chimney. Jonas slowed his horse to a walk. On the porch, Martha sat in a wooden chair, wrapped in a shawl. Her face was pale and bruised, her arm bound in a sling. When she saw him riding in, she rose slowly, one hand gripping the railing for balance. Jonas dismounted, his boots sinking into the wet earth. He took the bundle from his saddlebag and climbed the steps without a word. Martha's eyes glistened when he placed the oilcloth in her hands. She opened it, fingers trembling, and stared at the locket lying there, the small knife, the shawl she'd thought lost. Tears welled and slipped down her cheeks, carving clean paths through the bruises. Jonas removed his hat and sat beside her on the porch steps. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sounds were the wind moving through the grass and the faint creak of the porch boards beneath their boots. Finally, she found her voice, soft and unsteady. "You shouldn't have gone alone." He looked out toward the valley, where the sun was painting the mesas gold. Didn't have a choice. Her hand found his. "You'll carry it now," she said. He nodded once. "I've been carrying it a long time." They sat that way until the light began to fade again, the day sliding into its gentler hours. A hawk circled high above, silent except for the beat of its wings. Jonas turned to her, his voice low and certain. "They won't come again." Martha smiled faintly, the tears still glistening in her eyes. "I know." He watched the horizon until the sun dipped low, turning the land to fire. His shadow stretched long across the yard, merging with the twilight until it seemed to belong more to legend than to man. When darkness finally came, the ranch lights glowed warm against the distance. Martha went inside, and Jonas lingered on the porch, lighting a cigar. The smoke curled up into the starlit sky, thin and silver. He leaned back in the chair that had always been too small for his frame, his hat tilted forward, the glow of the cigar ember pulsing softly in the dark. The land around him was still. Somewhere beyond the hills, coyotes called, their voices rising like old hymns. The wind carried the scent of rain and wood smoke, the same as it had on the morning before everything changed. He closed his eyes and listened, not to the ghosts or the echoes, but to the steady rhythm of life returning to its place. They say the next dawn broke clean and bright, and that the storm clouds never returned to Dawson Valley again. They say the vultures that circled over the canyon that night never flew back east. And when the ranch hands came riding in from the neighboring spread, they found the trail quiet, the fences unbroken, the land at peace. In town, stories began to spread before the week was out. Some said a gang had vanished in the storm. Others swore they'd heard gunfire rolling down from the canyon, like thunder from heaven. But everyone agreed on one thing, that the giant rancher had ridden out alone, and by the next morning, the valley belonged to him again. Years later, travelers passing through would sometimes stop by the ranch, just to see the man whose name had become a whisper of justice in a lawless land. Most never met him. They'd see the shadow of a tall figure moving slow through the yard at dusk, hat low, shoulders broad as the barn itself, and they'd swear they felt the ground hum beneath their boots. And when the sun set behind the mesas, the light stretching long across the plain, they'd look west and think they saw him riding, a giant silhouette against the red horizon. Some say it was just the wind stirring the dust. Others say it was him, keeping watch over the land he'd bled for. But those who truly knew, the old hands, the ranch folk, the ones who'd shared coffee and silence with him, they'd smile and shake their heads when the stories came around. They'd say, when the sun goes down over Dawson Valley, you can still see his shadow riding toward the light. And if you listen close, you'll hear the whisper of a promise kept by a man too big for mercy and too old for fear. By sundown, he had avenged her, and by dawn, he had become a legend.